My name is Ethan Cole, and for 10 years, I've been a paramedic in Detroit. The job has taken me to dark places, both out there on the streets and inside my own head. I've seen things no one should ever see, things that claw at the edges of your sanity when you're lying awake at night. But nothing prepared me for the call that came in on that cold October night. I was already running on empty, running on caffeine and routine, when the dispatch came through, crackling over the radio like an omen. Unit 17, medical emergency, abandoned building, West End Street, possible unresponsive male, unknown condition. West End. Just hearing the name sent a chill through me. That part of the city had a reputation, burned out houses, forgotten warehouses, a place people went to disappear, and some of them never came back. Abandoned building, my partner Miles muttered, glancing at me from the passenger seat. Bet it's another junkie passed out. Want to place bets? I forced a chuckle, but it was hollow. I'll take the under. $20 says it's a guy looking for a warm place to sleep. But deep down, something felt off. I couldn't explain it, but my gut was churning. We pulled up to the address, and right away, I knew something wasn't right. The building loomed in the fog, a decaying skeleton of brick and shattered windows. The front door hung open, creaking with the breeze. A single flickering streetlight bathed the entrance in a sickly yellow glow. No bystanders, no signs of life. Just an eerie silence that wrapped around us like a shroud. Dispatch said the call came from inside? Miles asked, adjusting his gloves, eyes scanning the darkness. I nodded, swallowing against the growing lump in my throat. Yeah, let's check it out. As we stepped inside, the air changed. It was thick, damp, heavy with the scent of rot and mildew. Our boots echoed on the cracked tile, the darkness swallowing the beam of our flashlights. Then we saw it, a trail of something dark, blood maybe, smearing across the floor, leading deeper into the building. Miles cursed under his breath. This ain't right, man. We should call this in and wait for PD. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to listen to him, to back out, to get the hell away from this place. But something pulled me forward. We have a job to do, I said, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be. Let's just check inside, quick, and if we don't find anyone, we're out. Miles sighed but followed. Fine, but if I get jumped by some crackhead, I'm kicking your ass. I almost laughed, almost. As we moved deeper inside, the air grew colder. It felt wrong, like the building itself was watching us. The shadows twisted, shifting under the flashlight's glow, and the silence was almost suffocating. Then we found him. A man crumpled in the corner of what used to be a lobby, his eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. His chest rose and fell in shallow, erratic gasps, his lips moving in silent prayers or whispers. His clothes were tattered, covered in dirt and dried blood. I knelt beside him, pressing 2 fingers to his neck. His pulse was rapid, too fast. Sir, can you hear me? His eyes snapped to mine, wild and desperate. He grabbed my wrist with a strength that shouldn't have been possible. His nails dug into my skin. Don't let it take me, he rasped, eyes darting behind me, staring into the darkness. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. There's no one here, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You're safe now? His grip tightened, his eyes full of something beyond fear, something deeper. No, he whispered. It's here. A loud bang echoed down the hall behind us, and Miles whipped around, flashlight trembling in his grip. What the hell was that? My heart pounded against my ribs. Let's get him out of here. The man fought us as we loaded him onto the stretcher, thrashing and muttering under his breath. His eyes never left the hallway, as if something unseen was crawling toward him from the darkness. Miles pushed the stretcher toward the exit, while I grabbed the medical kit, my eyes flicking back down the hall. For a second, just a second, I thought I saw something shift, a shadow that didn't belong. We got out of there fast. Once inside the rig, I could finally breathe again. The man lay on the stretcher, breathing hard, his eyes flickering open and shut. Miles sat across from me, still wide-eyed, gripping the edge of his seat. You saw it too, didn't you? He asked. I didn't answer. I just reached for the radio. Unit 17 to dispatch, patient secured, en route to Detroit General. The dispatcher's voice crackled back, but I barely heard it. The man on the stretcher whimpered again, staring at the ceiling with wide, haunted eyes. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered. "Now it knows your name." I stared at him, feeling the weight of his words sink deep into my bones. And in the reflection of the rig's window, for just a split second, I thought I saw something standing in the dark behind us. The rig sped down the empty streets, the sirens wailing into the night, but inside the ambulance, it felt deathly quiet. Miles sat across from me, his eyes fixed on the patient, watching him with a nervous tension that made my own pulse race. The man lay on the stretcher, trembling, sweat soaking through his clothes. His breathing was shallow, ragged, and his eyes, those wild, terrified eyes, never stopped darting around the space, as if he expected something to leap out of the shadows at any moment. I checked his vitals again. His heart was racing, his oxygen levels were dropping, and his body temperature was dangerously low. But it was his whispering that unnerved me the most. "Can you hear it?" he mumbled, his lips barely moving. "It's coming. It's coming. It never leaves." I leaned closer, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sir, you're safe now. We're taking you to the hospital, all right? Just stay with me." His eyes snapped to mine, and suddenly his hand shot out, gripping my arm with a force that shouldn't have been possible in his condition. "No one's safe," he hissed through cracked lips. "It follows. It wants you now." A cold chill spread through me, but I forced myself to stay professional, peeling his fingers off my arm as gently as I could. "Miles, give him another round of fluids," I said, keeping my focus on the patient. Miles didn't move. "Miles?" I looked up and my stomach clenched. He was staring at the back doors, his face pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. His lips moved, but no sound came out. "What?" I asked, my voice coming out sharper than I intended. He slowly raised a shaky hand and pointed to the window. "Ethan, tell me you see that." My heart pounded as I followed his gaze. In the reflection of the rig's back window, something moved. At first I thought it was a trick of the streetlights, the way they flickered in the night. But as the ambulance passed under another set of lights, the shadow remained, a tall, distorted figure standing just outside the window, featureless but unmistakably human in shape. I blinked hard, telling myself it was nothing. Just exhaustion. Just another call messing with my head. But then it moved. It didn't walk, it slid, like a smudge on reality, shifting unnaturally across the glass. My chest tightened, and my fingers dug into the edge of the stretcher. Miles was shaking now, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me you see it." I swallowed hard. "Keep your eyes on the patient," I muttered, tearing my gaze away. "It's nothing." The man on the stretcher started laughing softly, a dry wheezing sound that sent shivers down my spine. "It's never nothing," he rasped. I ignored him, focusing on the monitor, on the numbers, on anything but that goddamn window. We turned a corner and the figure vanished, just like that. Miles let out a shaky breath, rubbing his face. "Man, I swear to God I thought..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "I need sleep." I wanted to agree, wanted to tell him it was all in our heads, but the tight knot in my gut wouldn't let me. Instead, I forced a tight smile. "Yeah, it's been a long shift." We pulled into the hospital bay, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a little relief. The bright lights, the controlled chaos of the ER. This was familiar. This was safe. As we wheeled the stretcher inside, the patient grabbed my wrist again, his grip weaker this time, but still desperate. His eyes locked onto mine, and in that moment, I saw something deep inside them. Something hollow, something broken. "Don't let it follow you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Close the doors. Keep the lights on. Don't look back." Before I could respond, the ER staff took over, wheeling him away and shouting orders. I stood there for a moment, watching him disappear into the chaos. Miles clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Come on, man, let's go grab a coffee. I need something to clear my head." I nodded absently, but as we walked out to the ambulance, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder. Nothing was there. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't so sure I was alone. The coffee in my hand was lukewarm and bitter, but I barely noticed. I sat in the driver's seat of the rig, staring out at the hospital parking lot, my fingers wrapped too tightly around the cup. The The buzz of the city outside felt distant, muted, like the world had shifted slightly off its axis since that call. Miles sat beside me, drumming his fingers against the dashboard, his knee bouncing in that nervous way I'd come to recognize as his tell. "Man? I can't shake it," he muttered, staring out at nothing in particular. I didn't have to ask what he meant. I felt it too. "It's just another call," I said, though even I didn't believe it. Junkie hallucinating, our minds playing tricks on us. We've been up too long, that's all. Miles let out a dry laugh, but there was no humor in it. Yeah, maybe, but what if it wasn't? I turned to look at him, and for a second neither of us spoke. It was the unspoken truth hanging in the air between us, thick and heavy. We'd both seen it, that shadow, that thing outside the rig. And the patient, whatever the hell was wrong with him, he knew. "You heard what he said," Miles went on, his voice quieter now. "About it following us." I sighed, rubbing a hand over my face, trying to shake the unease crawling up my spine. "People say crazy shit when they're out of it, Miles. Don't let it get to you." But I couldn't shake it either. Before he could respond, the radio crackled again. "Unit 17, respond to a welfare check. Residential address on Oak Ridge Drive. Neighbor reports lights flickering inside. Possible unresponsive occupant." I groaned inwardly. "Great! Another late-night welfare check." Miles didn't respond right away. He just stared at the radio, his knuckles going white against the edge of the seat. "Ethan? Oak Ridge Drive? Isn't that?" I glanced at the call log, my chest tightening. It was the same street, the same neighborhood, just a few blocks down from where we picked up our earlier patient. Coincidence. Had to be. I started the engine. "Let's go." The house was a two-story Victorian, its paint peeling, the front porch sagging under years of neglect. It stood in stark contrast to the neatly kept homes surrounding it, like a dark blot on an otherwise normal street. The neighbor, an older woman wrapped in a heavy cardigan, met us on the sidewalk, wringing her hands. I think something's wrong," she said, glancing at the house like she was afraid it might hear her. "The lights have been going on and off all night, and I knocked, but no answer." "Have you seen the resident lately?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. She shook her head. "Not in days, but something doesn't feel right." Miles shifted uneasily beside me. "We'll check it out, ma'am." The woman nodded, clutching her cardigan tighter. "Be careful," she whispered. We stepped onto the porch, and the wooden boards creaked beneath our boots. The front door was ajar just slightly, enough to make the hairs on my arms stand on end. I exchanged a glance with Miles. "You good?" He swallowed hard, but nodded. "Let's get it over with." I pushed the door open, and the house swallowed us whole. Inside, the air was thick, stale, like it had been trapped for too long. The living room was in disarray, furniture overturned, picture frames shattered on the floor. A single light bulb flickered in the hallway, casting eerie, stuttering shadows against the peeling wallpaper. "Miles," I whispered, stepping over a broken coffee table. "Something's not right here." "No kidding," he muttered, shining his flashlight toward the staircase. "Hello? EMS!" No answer. Just the distant hum of electricity and the rhythmic creaking of the house settling, except it didn't sound like settling. It sounded like footsteps. A sudden noise made both of us jump, a thud from upstairs. Miles turned to me, his face pale. "We should call for backup." I hesitated. My gut screamed at me to leave, to walk out that door and forget any of this ever happened. But duty pulled me forward. Someone could be in trouble. Someone might need us. "We check upstairs," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. The staircase groaned beneath our weight as we ascended, the old house shifting with each step. The air grew colder, heavier. With every step, I felt that prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like something was watching. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched into darkness. The flickering light at the end cast long, distorted shadows, and for a split second, I thought I saw something move. Then we heard it. A voice, whispering. Miles froze beside me, his breath hitching. "Ethan, tell me you hear that." I did. It was low, rasping, and I couldn't make out the words, but it was coming from the room at the end of the hall. I swallowed hard, pushing forward, my pulse hammering in my ears. The door was slightly ajar, just like the front one had been. I nudged it open with my boot. Inside, the bedroom was in shambles, drawers pulled out, clothes strewn everywhere. But the worst part was the figure sitting on the edge of the bed. The same man. The patient from earlier. His eyes were wide and empty, staring at the wall. His lips moved, forming silent words. I stepped closer, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. "Sir, how the hell did you get here?" He didn't move, didn't acknowledge us. Miles grabbed my arm, his grip trembling. "Ethan, we took him to the hospital. We saw him go inside." I reached out cautiously, shaking the man's shoulder. "Sir?" His head snapped toward me with an unnatural speed, his eyes locking onto mine. "You shouldn't have come back," he whispered, his voice an echo of the words he'd spoken in the rig. And then the lights went out. In the suffocating darkness, something moved. And for the first time in my 10 years as a paramedic, I felt true, bone-deep terror. The darkness swallowed us whole. For a heartbeat, everything was silent, except for my own ragged breathing and the rapid thudding of my pulse against my eardrums. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking more than I'd like to admit. And when I finally flicked it on, the narrow beam cut through the blackness like a knife. The man was still sitting there, his face half illuminated by the harsh light. His eyes, wide and unblinking, reflected the beam in an eerie way, like a predator caught in the dark. Miles's voice was a low whisper beside me, trembling. "Ethan, we need to get the hell out of here." I wanted to agree. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn and run, to leave this house, to forget any of this ever happened. But something kept me frozen in place. A deep, gnawing feeling that if I left now, it wouldn't stop. I swallowed hard and took a cautious step forward. "Sir, how did you get here?" My voice barely came out, scraping past the lump in my throat. The man tilted his head slightly, like he was trying to listen to something I couldn't hear. Then, in a slow, jerky movement, he reached up and pressed a finger to his lips. "Shh." Miles cursed under his breath, taking a step back. "Ethan, I'm done, man. This is too much." I ignored him, my focus locked on the man. His lips started moving again, whispering under his breath, repeating the same phrase over and over. "It's in the dark. It's in the dark. It knows your name. It knows your name." Goosebumps erupted all over my arms, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The air grew colder, pressing against me like a heavy weight. Then, from somewhere deep in the house, something scraped, a slow, deliberate dragging sound, like nails against wood, echoing down the hallway from behind us. Miles whipped around, his flashlight beam darting wildly down the hall, but there was nothing there, nothing we could see. "Ethan," he hissed, his voice cracking, "we need to go." I took another step forward, but the man suddenly lunged forward, grabbing my wrist in a vice-like grip. His eyes burned into mine, and for the first time, I saw something beyond fear in them, pure, raw terror. "You brought it here," he whispered. His voice cracked, and his grip trembled. "You shouldn't have come back. You let it in." The scraping grew louder, closer, and then the whispers started. Not from him, from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. 1,000 voices, overlapping, distorted, hissing my name in a chorus that sent ice down my spine. "Ethan, Ethan, Ethan!" I ripped my arm free, stumbling back, and grabbed Miles by the shoulder. "Go!" We bolted, running down the hallway, our flashlights bouncing wildly against the walls. The whispers followed, growing louder, merging into something almost like laughter, low, guttural, and filled with malice. We hit the stairs hard, nearly tumbling over each other as we raced down. I could feel it behind us, pressing in, closing the distance. I didn't dare look back. We burst through the front door, the cold night air hitting us like a wall, and I slammed the door shut behind us. Miles doubled over, hands on his knees, gasping for breath. "Jesus Christ," he wheezed. "What the hell was that?" I couldn't answer. My hands were shaking and my legs felt like jelly. I stared up at the house, watching, waiting for something, anything to move inside those dark windows. But nothing happened, just silence. The neighbor stood frozen on the sidewalk, her eyes wide. Did you find him?" I shook my head, forcing myself to stay calm. "There's no one in there," I lied, my voice hollow. I could still feel it, whatever it was, watching from behind the curtains. Miles grabbed my arm. We're not reporting this, right? I mean, what the hell do we even say? I swallowed hard, glancing at the ambulance parked down the street, its flashing lights a harsh contrast to the darkness behind us. No, I said finally. We don't report this. He nodded too quickly, like he was trying to convince himself that we could just forget what happened. But I knew better. As I climbed back into the rig, something in the rearview mirror caught my eye. A figure, standing at the window of the house, watching. Only this time, it wasn't the man we found earlier. It was something else. And it was smiling. Back at the station, everything felt wrong. The fluorescent lights buzzed too loudly. The hum of the vending machine seemed unnatural, and even the coffee tasted off. Stale, metallic. I sat at the break room table, staring into the dark liquid swirling in my cup, my fingers tapping nervously against the ceramic. Miles sat across from me, his eyes locked on the floor, his knee bouncing so fast it made the table shake. Neither of us had spoken much since we left Oak Ridge Drive. What the hell was there to say? Finally, Miles broke the silence. We shouldn't have gone in, man. His voice was hollow, distant. We should have waited for PD. I exhaled slowly, my grip tightening on the cup. We followed protocol. Yeah. He let out a shaky laugh, his eyes wide and tired. You think protocol covers that? I didn't answer. I couldn't. I kept replaying it in my head. The man whispering, the scraping sound closing in, the thing at the window. I knew I'd never sleep again, not without seeing it behind my eyelids. You saw it too, right? Miles asked suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. I met his gaze. Saw what? He clenched his jaw. In the window, when we left. That thing. It wasn't him. I swallowed hard, trying to suppress the icy tendrils crawling up my spine. I don't know what I saw. Miles let out a bitter chuckle. Bullshit. You know. We both know. He leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. Something followed us back, Ethan. I shook my head. No, it was just... Before I could finish, the station lights flickered. Miles and I both froze. The hum of the vending machine stuttered, the fluorescent tubes overhead blinking erratically. For a moment, everything felt like it was holding its breath. And then, from the hallway outside, we heard it. A faint, rhythmic tapping. My blood turned to ice. Miles shot to his feet, his face drained of color. No, 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 no. The tapping grew louder, closer. It wasn't footsteps. It was something else. Something deliberate, like nails dragging against tile. We locked eyes, our breaths coming shallow and fast. I reached for my radio, but the static crackled before I could even press the button. And then it whispered, Ethan? The voice was distant but clear, as if it had always been there, waiting. My hands shook as I stood, my pulse hammering in my ears. Miles, we're leaving, now. He nodded quickly and we moved in unison, heading for the door as calmly as possible, though every instinct screamed at me to run. We stepped into the hallway and the sound stopped. Just dead silence. I swallowed hard, glancing over my shoulder. The corridor stretched out behind us, empty but feeling too empty. We made it outside to the rig, slamming the doors shut behind us, our breathing ragged. Miles was visibly shaking, wiping his sweaty hands on his pants. What the hell is happening? He muttered, his voice cracking. This isn't just another bad call, man. This is something else. I couldn't argue with him. I felt it too. I reached for the ignition, eager to get as far from the station as possible, but before I could turn the key, something moved in the side mirror. A figure, standing by the station entrance, tall, unmoving. My stomach dropped. It wasn't human. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Even in the dim glow of the parking lot lights, I could feel it staring. I punched the gas, tires screeching as we tore out of the lot. Miles didn't say anything. He didn't need to. We drove in silence, the city blurring past, but I couldn't stop glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it right behind us. Finally, Miles spoke, his voice hoarse. Where are we going? I kept my eyes on the road. Somewhere with lights, lots of people. But deep down, I knew that no matter how far we drove, how bright the lights were, we couldn't outrun it. It had found us, and it wasn't going away. The rig sped through the city streets, the bright neon lights blurring past the windshield, but no amount of speed could shake the feeling that it was still with us. Every shadow we passed, every flickering street lamp, felt like it was watching, waiting. Miles sat in the passenger seat, hunched forward, his breathing uneven. He hadn't said a word in minutes, just stared out the window like he was expecting something to reach out from the darkness and pull him under. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white. "We need to talk to someone," I muttered, more to myself than him. "Someone who's seen this kind of thing before." Miles let out a hollow laugh. "Who, Ethan? Who the hell do we talk to about this?" He waved a hand in the air, frustration lacing his voice. "Cops? They'll think we're losing it. The department will be benched for psych evals." I swallowed hard. He was right. No one would believe us. Hell, I barely believed it myself. But deep down, I knew we couldn't just keep running. "Maybe the hospital," I suggested, trying to sound confident. "Dr. Patel, she's seen her fair share of weird cases. She might know something." Miles just shook his head. "It's not a case, man," he whispered. "It's something else. Something wrong." I glanced at him, and for a brief moment, I saw it, the fear etched deep in his face, the same fear gnawing away at my insides. Whatever was following us, it wasn't letting go. Suddenly, the radio crackled. "Unit 17, respond to a distress call. Female, 29 years old, unresponsive. Apartment 4B, Oak Ridge Drive." I slammed my foot on the brake. Oak Ridge, again. Miles stared at the radio like it had just grown teeth. No way. Dispatch has got to be screwing with us." I sat frozen, staring at the glowing display, my mind racing. This wasn't a coincidence. Whatever had started at that house earlier tonight, it wasn't over. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to drive as far from Oak Ridge as possible. But another part, the part that still held on to duty, onto responsibility, wouldn't let me. "We have to go," I said quietly. Miles turned to me, his eyes wide and desperate. "No, Ethan, I'm not going back there." I hesitated. Every rational part of me agreed with him. But something deep inside, whether it was instinct or madness, I couldn't turn away. "We have to," I said again, gripping the wheel. "What if someone really needs us?" Miles shook his head violently. "Screw that. Whatever's there doesn't want to be saved." I took a deep breath, staring at the road ahead. "Then I'll go alone." He cursed under his breath, running a hand through his hair, but eventually he muttered, "You're gonna get us killed." I didn't argue. I just turned the rig around. When we pulled up to the apartment building on Oak Ridge Drive, it felt different this time. Worse. The air was thick, heavy, and the streetlights flickered like they were struggling against the darkness pressing in around them. We stepped out of the rig slowly, moving toward the entrance, my heart hammering in my chest. Miles walked close beside me, his flashlight flicking nervously across the peeling paint of the old apartment doors. The hallway smelled like mildew and stale cigarette smoke, and as we climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, an uneasy silence settled around us. Apartment 4B stood at the end of the hall, the door slightly ajar, just like before. I reached for it, my fingers trembling. "EMS!" I called out, my voice echoing down the empty corridor. No answer. I pushed the door open, and what I saw made my blood turn to ice. It was the same room, the same overturned furniture, the same broken picture frames, the same oppressive darkness. But this time, something was different. There was a figure standing in the middle of the room. A woman. Her back was to us, her long, tangled hair cascading over her shoulders. She stood perfectly still, facing the far wall, her arms hanging limply at her sides. Miles let out a shaky breath. "Ethan, I don't like this." Neither did I. "Ma'am," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "We're with EMS. Are you all right?" No response. I took a cautious step closer, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Her feet weren't touching the ground. She was hovering, barely an inch above the floor, but enough to send ice through my veins. I grabbed Miles's arm. "We're leaving, now." But before we could move, the woman's head snapped violently to the side, unnaturally fast, like a broken marionette, and she whispered, "You let it in." The lights flickered once, twice, and then everything went black. The air grew heavy, suffocating, pressing down on my chest as the whispers started again. swirling around us like a chorus of distant voices. Miles grabbed my arm, his voice panicked. "We have to go! We have to go now!" I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my throat as I fumbled blindly for the door. I could feel something closing in around us, a cold presence that slithered over my skin like tendrils of smoke. We burst into the hallway, slamming the door behind us and bolting down the stairs 2 at a time. My lungs burned, but I didn't stop until we were outside, gasping in the freezing night air. Miles leaned against the ambulance, clutching his chest. "No more, Ethan," he wheezed. "No more calls from Oak Ridge." I nodded, trying to catch my breath. Agreed. But as we stood there, staring at the darkened building, I knew the truth. It wasn't over, not even close.